Hi guys, how's it going? How's it going? Everything else? Everything okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you, Clem Fandango.
That's good. Thank you very much. All right then. Just want to get on with this. I'm going to share a few experiences that I've had. Obviously, I'm not a debunker per se, but I'm glad to say I'm part of the debunker community. So glad to be that because there's some great debunkers out there. I love so many of them. Of course, you have some of the more famous ones. I'm sure everyone knows who they are. You know, for example, our friend, if I can find them. Yeah, our friend Crow. You have our friends Bedo and Justin. And we can't forget. That's where my browser's crapping out now. It's so good. It's so much fun. Spinny wheel of death. Are you kidding me? Excuse me a second. Not let me do anything. Hold on, guys.
Yes, I can hear you, Clem Fandango.
I'm an Englishman in
Australia.
I'd like to welcome the pommy bastard to God's own earth.
Would you like to see my limp penis?
I swear he's about that big and about that thick.
There I am. Okie dokie, as you can tell, I'm not used to using StreamYard, but never mind. So, I just wanted to get into a few experiences of me, me, myself, and I, and my mother as well. I think I'll start off with my mother, because those are kind of second hand, and I can spend more time on the my own stories, which I obviously have more experience of because I experienced them. Duh. Okay, I'm just going to pop something up here. Where's it gone? Still got my buy my coffee thing on there. Email. Hi, Wayne. Hi, Giuseppe. I already said hello to you. Ah, Mr. Prism. I am so glad you're here because would you believe I got a message for you, a voice message from, of all people, Sir Michael Caine, especially for you. Here it is.
There are only two things I can't stand in this world. People who are intolerant of other people's cultures and the Dutch.
I hope you enjoy that. Hi, Central Mass Paranormal Society. Right. You can tell this is not a professional stream at all. But getting into my mum's experiences. My mother was a total believer in things, and the paranormal and spirits and the afterlife and everything like that. But my dad was a complete skeptic and atheist. So it was a weird mix, which is probably why I grew up to be 40 and sort of somewhere in the middle, neither. But she had a lot of experiences. She told me about things that she would have kind of feelings about things that usually was tied into looking at the clock and getting a feeling, and then later on find out something that happened when that exact thing happened. She sort of noted the time. One of the more negative ones was when she was waiting to hear back from a relative, I think it was an uncle or something like that, who had gone to the hospital, and she had been waiting and probably smoking a lot of cigarettes, and she suddenly just got this really bad feeling, but a feeling that something was over, and she looked at the clock and decided to go to bed, and then the next day they found out he died at that very time. A more happier one was when my nephew was being born. She was in labor for a long time, and my mum was sitting up worrying, biting her fingernails, and then she just suddenly got this feeling of relief and things are going to be okay, and she looked at the clock, and it was like something like 1:25 in the morning, and she went to bed, and the next day my brother phoned to say that his son had been born, and when they said, you know, what time were they born, it was 1:25. So it was that type of thing. When back in, now I'm thinking this is 1981, but the reason why I'm not sure is because it was New Year's Day, so it could have been like New Year's Eve, so it might have been 1980, but I think it was the next day, so it would be the very first day of 1981. And she was in the kitchen, and we looked out onto this school, and you can see to the kitchen, and this school was built as a grammar school back in the sort of 1910s, and it had a very very gothic looking bell tower. It was quite creepy looking. It was. Not showing up. Come on. There it is. That was a bell tower that we could see through our kitchen window at all times. Kind of like a creepy face. And she was, it was quite late at night, and she was washing the dishes, and me and my dad were in the sitting room, and we just heard this almighty scream, and like the sound of plates being dropped into the sink. And we ran into the kitchen to see what was wrong, and she said that she'd seen this big orangey red light above this bell tower. So it was in the sky. I mean, it might not have been above it, but it was sort of lined up with it. And it was really bright, and then it got really small and zipped away really fast. Now, this what kind of struck me straight away as being interesting, because she didn't know this, but that is a common thing that has been witnessed in UFO accounts, is being a very bright light and then become very small and then zipping away very fast. In fact, John Keel, who was the author of the Mothman Prophecies and many other books, he actually thought that this wasn't the craft zipping away really fast. It was actually moving up the visible spectrum and just appeared to zip off. But anyway, the next day, I'd gone out into the local area, and the first friend that I saw, I sort of said, "Oh, you never guess what my mother saw last night?" And he said, "What, a big orange red light in the sky that zipped off?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And then said, "Oh, yeah, I saw it." And my two friends who were out staying outside, I think they were even camping somewhere, they saw it as well. So later on in the week, I think it was a couple of days later or so, we have like a couple of local newspapers that come out daily, actually based in Newcastle, but they cover news in my area. They reported it, and loads of people in the town had seen it, including the police officer. And then later on, our weekly local newspaper had reported it as well, and even said that a person from our neighbouring village, which is like 3 3/4 miles away, had seen it over our town. So it was lots of witnesses to that. And the weird thing was, later on in life, my mother kind of denied that she'd seen it, but obviously that doesn't really count because those of other people did see it. And the interesting thing with it being New Year's Day 1981, I think, is that that was only like a week after Rendlesham. And what many people don't talk about with Rendlesham is that was just the start of a huge UFO flap. That's a UFO flap, not a piss. No, anyway. That lasted for most of 1981, and there was lots of sightings around the UK, including a few up where I live, including one weird one where someone said it looked like a tadpole, which was strange. But that was more up towards Hadrian's Wall, sort of up in the moors and the woods. Hi, Sarah. So, yeah. I don't have an accent. What are you talking about? But later on in life, when both my parents had retired, my mother still worked. She'd been a nurse for most of her life, and worked in care homes towards the end of her working life. But when she retired, she actually went back and started to still work just a few like part-time hours in care homes. And she used to do this thing where she would stay overnight, and she could basically just sleep. They have like a room you could go to, and you could just sleep. But if there was problems, if they needed an extra hand, they would wake you up, and you could go and help. But often you just slept and you got paid for it, which sounds pretty good. Well, my dad would pick her up every morning from this place. It was actually this big house that, in this very posh area of where I live, like a huge sort of Victorian or Georgian house that had been turned into a care home. And she was waiting to be picked up by my dad, standing in sort of the doorway in the porch, and she was talking to someone else who had finished, was waiting for her husband to come and pick her up. And they must have been sort of standing facing each other, so they go back against like either wall. And my mother told me when she came back straight away, she told me that when she was talking to her friend, she saw an old woman, which at first she obviously thought that's okay. We're in old people's homes, so an old person is not unusual. This old person then walked through a wall, just disappeared into a wall. But her and her friend were just still talking because, Geordie women, they like a nuclear explosion going off on the horizon wouldn't stop them having a conversation. But later on that night, they're on the same shift again. And as soon as my mum walked in, the other person, a friend, came up to her and said straight away, "Did you see what I saw this morning?" And she described it exactly the same way as just as a woman just walking through a wall. So I find that interesting because obviously that's two witnesses who are collaborating, you know. And she was more likely to talk about those cases. As I said, she kind of started to deny the one about the UFO. Can you not tell, Giuseppe? I know a lot of people in chat, though. I come across quite a lot of people from this area, or at least living in this area, so that's good. We should all have a big meetup at some point. So, one of the things, another story I want to tell, and I've said this in one of the chats before, I think on Justin's chat, that at one point we were getting an extractor fan put in the kitchen, but there was a guy there putting this extractor fan on, and my mother was talking to him, but I was sort of popping in and out of the kitchen. And when I was in there, he was telling her about this time where he's putting something similar into someone's house. And there was an old building that had been turned into different apartments, I think. And this old woman came in. And this must have been like the very early 80s. And so the fact that she was wearing very old-looking clothes, very sort of vintage clothes, like you know, turn of the century maybe, or even earlier than that, didn't really stand out because, you know, some people just still wore the same stuff they'd worn all their lives, so it wasn't really something that looked unusual. And this old woman was just talking to him, asking him what he was doing, just general chit-chat. And he'd obviously turn back to do what he was doing now and again, but at one point he turned back for like a second and turned back to her again, and she had gone. It was quite a big kitchen, so it wasn't like she's just walking around the corner. But he didn't really think much of it. He just thought, oh, well. And then when the owner of the house, or the renter or whatever, came back in, he asked her about the old woman, and she said, well, there's no one like that here. I've never seen anyone like that. Yeah, Wayne. You know, Newcastle brown ale is popular everywhere. There's people in America drink it. I know even Chris Pratt likes a bit of Newcastle brown ale. So anyway, that story I find quite interesting because it's quite similar to some things you hear when these supposed ghosts or probable ghosts are actually quite solid, quite normal looking, that could be mistaken for a person, and they either disappear right in front of the people, or they sort of walk off or disappear when they turn around. Boston, Sarah, yeah, they have it in California, and they have it even in casinos and that. But they, I can't remember. They call it something. Does anyone know what they call it? It's the same name, but they have a kind of nickname for it. I can't remember what it is. I don't think Newcastle brown ale is as good as it used to be. The Trent House in Newcastle, where Viz started out, that they used to have Newcastle brown ale in on draft, which was really good. Anyway, moving on from my mother. If I've got time at the end, I might tell you how Central Mass, you or what? Ah, okay. I'll tell you about how my mother was blown up. If you have time at the end, if someone reminds me. Okay, now, similar to my mother's experiences of knowing when things had happened or getting a feeling when things had happened and looking at the clock. I've talked about these in some chats now and again, but obviously it's hard to get the full story out and the amount of characters that they have there. But I've had weird dreams or sort of daydreams that are linked to people dying, which is great. Yeah, just happy I'll tell you at the end. 7 years before I was born, so obviously she wasn't totally blown up. The back in the 90s, I used to stay over at my friend's house. He was able to buy a house in his early 20s because back then you could buy a house for like 30 grand. Seems so long ago, that. But I stayed over there usually every Saturday, and he drove me back to my place, my parents' house, on the Sunday. And this was just before, it was, I think, I don't know, it was 96 or 97, maybe 96. And it was, we were both fans of Father Ted. And there'd been 2 seasons of Father Ted, and the 3rd season was coming up, and we were both really excited about the 3rd season. This was literally a week away. I think it was going to be the following Friday that it started. And on this Saturday night, Sunday morning or whatever, I slept at his place, and I had this dream, and it was a weird dream because it was a mundane dream, because my dreams are usually mental. So the fact that this dream was just me and him talking about something seemed to stand out. But it was the fact that we were talking about whether they can continue Father Ted because the lead actor had died. Now, this was on the Saturday night or very early Sunday morning that I dreamt this. So when I got up in the morning, I told him about it when he drove me back home. And we both had a laugh about it. And later on the Sunday, after I'd gone to bed for a little afternoon nap and got up, it was the early evening news, which was around 5 o'clock. I came downstairs, and my mother said, "You never guess what happened." And I said, "What?" And she says, "The lead actor of Father Ted's died." And at first I was like, "You're joking." And she said, no, it's just come up. And I believe that's when they first released that news. I might be wrong, but I mean, he died on the Saturday night. So I don't think they would have put the news out quick. I thought they would waited a little bit before they released that news because it was obviously very sudden. And I actually got that story published in 14 Times because there was a guy who was another regular writer of 14 Times that wrote into the "It Happened to Me" section to tell a similar dream that he'd gone into a record store in his dream, and they had certain displays. You know, sometimes they'll have themed displays in record stores, either about a recent film or whatever, I don't know. But there was a display with all these different artists on, of artists who had passed away. And one of the artists was Kirsty MacColl. And so when he woke up, he thought that was a weird dream because Kirsty MacColl's not dead. And then later on in the news, it came up that she died in that horrific speedboat accident. So I sent my story in as well. Before that, though, I'd been on a training course in Newcastle in the early 90s, and for some reason I managed to get home early, and I came back on the train back home, and it was a nice day. It was nice and sunny. I was just staring out the window as I usually do on the train, and I suddenly just got my auntie in my mind. It was my mother's youngest sister. And I hadn't seen her for a while, but when I was young, she was always the auntie that would give you a big slobbery kiss. Well, not slobbery, but you know. And I suddenly got this image in my mind of her for no reason. And I just felt this kind of real surge of like love. And I remember about her getting me kisses. And at the time, I was always like, ugh, but then I kind of thought that was great. And I didn't think anything of it. And I got home. And then later on, in the evening, I was playing my music on my hi-fi, and the phone rang, and my mother told me to shut my music off. And I could hear her talking, and she suddenly started to cry. And after she finished, I asked her, and her sister, my auntie, had died that afternoon. And later on, when we found out the details, it was roughly when I was on that train. They don't know exactly because she went upstairs for a nap because she said she didn't feel well, and then when her husband went up later on, that's when he found her. So there's like it's not specific, but it was within that time when I had that weird daydream. Later on, quite recently, only like 3 or 4 years ago, I had a dream, and I have terrible sleeping patterns. I usually go to bed very late and wake up sort of when most of the morning is finished. Often I wake up like 10:30 or 11, but this time I had a dream, and it was just before I woke up about 10:30, and I dreamt that I was in my mother's flat that she was in, but just before she died, and my sister was there, and my sister's dog. And my sister's dog was very excitable. I think they said when she was a puppy, they kept her in a tiny, tiny cage where she couldn't move, and she had to just spin about. So she would constantly spin about, and she would bark a lot just out of pure excitement. She had the kind of hyperactivity disorder, basically. But I like loved her to bits, and she really made a fuss of me. And it was when she got older, she was she had calmed down a tiny bit, and me and my son used to make a fuss of her. And when my sister got grandkids, they were very loud, and the dog used to sort of run away and hide. And I used to go and keep her company, lie next to her. But she seemed fine. She was old. She lost most of her teeth, so her tongue used to hang out the side like Stimpy from Ren and Stimpy. But she seemed fine. So when I had this dream and the dog was there, and I forgot to mention that the dog was human-sized. Actually, probably more than human size. It was taller than me, but she was very excitable as per usual. And she came over to me, and we gave each other a really big hug. And I felt this sort of like sense of love and a sense of saying goodbye. And this time, rather than in the past times when I woke up and wondered what the hell that was about, I woke up and I knew straight away that she died. And I sort of wondered about whether I should message my sister. But I thought that wouldn't really come across well. Me getting a message or whatever and saying, "Has she died?" So back then, I used to call my mum at 10 o'clock at night every night before she went to bed. So that night when I called her, she said straight away, "Oh, we've got bad news." I said, "Yeah, I know." And she said, "Oh, did she tell you?" And I said, "No, I dreamt her. She said goodbye in my dream." And I'm convinced that's what happened. The way it felt like nothing else to me. I don't care what people say when they go, you count the hits and ignore the misses. I ignored the misses and I got a divorce. But that's some of my weird dreams. I haven't had any recently, thank God. Every time I do have a dream about a celebrity, I panic in case I've pegged it, but not so far. So anyway, I'm going to put up a quick advert break for you all. I think some of you may have seen these when you've been watching my One Step Beyond. These are appropriate ones. This is appropriate to the paranormal world and the world of gadgets and communicating with the dead. I don't know why I'm typing. I instantly, by instinct, started type hello back to people. Hi, stay tuned, Phil. Hi, Sage Rat. Right, okay. Into my other experience, my proper experiences this time. Now, back in the early 2000s, I think it was 2003, I made a visit just by myself to the Edinburgh Vaults. And I'm sure you've heard of the Edinburgh Vaults. And by that time, I think I'd started to watch Most Haunted. Sorry to say. But I had seen the one on Edinburgh Vaults, and I read about it, and I was really interested. I love anything about things that have been... There's no problem, Giuseppe. Thanks for stopping by. I had seen all the stuff on it, and I was really interested in the stuff that people find underground. And Edinburgh it's a great place with lots of hidden stuff. So I was really wanting to go. So I just went there by myself. I got a hotel for the night, and I popped into the Edinburgh Vaults. And I don't know if anyone's been, but there's a room in there. Sometimes you get different stories and different names of things from different guides, but this one was called the cobbler's room. Cobblers, as in someone who makes shoes, not rubbish. Because one of the ghosts is supposed to be a cobbler, because they had business in the corner. Because all these little rooms in the Edinburgh Vaults, they were made up of from the arches of a bridge that got built up against, making all these sort of archways and sort of passages that people made into businesses and nefarious things as well. And the this bigger room was used by this cobbler, amongst other things, and so people had seen this ghost. But then she started to tell us about another ghost that was seen there. So we all spread out around her, and I was sort of to the side, but kind of behind her a bit. And I was standing there with my hands behind my back, like I was about to be arrested, or like a royal who's going on a walk around somewhere. And I felt this sort of cold feeling on my hands. Now, the guides always say that there are no drafts, no cold drafts in the vaults. I'm not sure whether I totally believe them, but I kind of just thought that's what it was. I just thought it was so cold on my hands. The problem is the story she was telling was about a female ghost, a young female ghost who liked to touch and hold the hands of young men, even though I wasn't that young. So I wasn't kind of thinking that's what it was. I was just doing that thing, when you read things about diseases or conditions, and you start to sort of imagine having them. You kind of read the different symptoms, and you think, "Oh, I can feel that now." It was kind of that sort of thing I was trying to push out of my mind. So after a while, I eventually moved my hands to the front, and it seemed to stop. So I thought, "Oh, well, there you go. It's just a draft." But then I got this feeling, and I can only describe it as, when if you see on a TV program or a movie where people who are, together in a partnership, like one would come up behind the other and put their hands over their shoulders or around them, and then put their hands onto their hands and maybe slowly move the hands down. No, not there. Slowly down towards the tip of the fingers. That's kind of how it felt. I didn't feel the arms around me bit, but that's what it felt like on my hands. And at that point, the guide had finished her little bit about this ghost, and she said, "And this mainly happens here." And she turned around and pointed directly at me. So that was fun. I don't really take that one that seriously. It's just a funny one. I thought it was the fact that she pointed directly at me, and I felt that. But later on, when I do take more seriously, is at the end of the tour, they led us back to where the stairs go up, and there's a room just there where they start off in, like a small room, and they said, "Oh, people can pop into here, spend a little time in here before we go up the stairs if you want to take photos and stuff like that." And I had a digital camera. It was quite early on in the, when digital cameras came out. So I was quite pleased to have this digital camera. So I was taking pictures and video, and you could like record audio on there as well. So I wanted to see if I could capture some EVPs. And I waited until the people sort of thinned down a bit to not catch any sort of contamination. The only problem was that the reason they'd thinned out is because they'd left, and I was by myself. I'd been left down there. So I made my way to go up the stairs and took a picture before I did, a picture down the corridor, which I would love to find, but I don't know where it is. But if I find it, I'll post it. It has something weird in that picture, although I think, like many of those pictures that came out in the early days of digital cameras, it's just probably a bit of moisture or something, or a bit of dust. But I went to go up the steps, and I heard these footsteps behind me coming down that corridor. I'd just taken a picture down, and and they're very loud footsteps, like someone was purposely walking really heavily. But at the time, I didn't think it was anything weird. I was actually glad. I thought, oh, there's someone here. So I turned around and went back down, and to kind of say, oh, I'm glad. I thought I'd been left here, but there was no one there. And I sort of had a quick peek in the rooms at the bottom, and there was no one in there either. So I went up the stairs, and when I got out of the door at the top, the people had all left the building that's above it and were on the road outside. So it wasn't the people walking across. And people who know about the law of the vaults might know that I don't know whether this is two separate entities or whether it's just one entity that does two different things, but there's an entity called either Mr. Boots or the Watcher. And as you can tell by Mr. Boots, the thing that he does is walk around really loudly. The other thing he does, which thankfully I didn't experience, was he sometimes shouts "get out" in your ear. So I'm glad I didn't experience that one. But I definitely think afterwards that sounded likely. That sounds like what I heard. Now, I went back just over a year later with my partner at the time, and we did the same thing at the end. And at the end, I purposely waited behind, but not as long as I did before, because I wanted to hear the sound as people filed up the stairs and walked across. Because the corridor of the building upstairs is sort of in line with the corridor in the vaults. So I wanted to hear what it sounded like when people were walking across, and you couldn't hear much at all, really. It definitely didn't sound like those really loud footsteps that I heard. So that was nice. I'll get to my other one in a second, but I think I'll have another quick commercial break. And this one is a proper commercial. This one is, it's not my sponsorship, but it's for a budget airline.
Up and away. Soon we'll all be taken to the skies as easily and as cheaply as hopping on the number 10 bus, thanks to those clever chaps at Budget Airlines. Their boffins have come up with a spiffing way of bringing the price of air travel down even further. Pilot job share. Here goes one chap finishing his shift, off home for tea. Don't worry, madam, his replacement will be along in a jiffy. Here he comes, bang on time. He'll get you there, madam. Because the pilots will be working on part-time hours, the savings for the airline will be passed on to you, the passenger. Of course, another way Budget Airlines keeps their prices down is by landing a little short of their stated destination.
quick commercial break for you there. Now, the next one. Now, this one is one that I sometimes forget about, which sounds weird when you hear it. But yeah, I always remember the one in the Edinburgh Vaults. But this one is an odd one. But when I moved into the house before this one, we hadn't been in there for long. A lot of crap from my old house where I lived with my parents. It wasn't my house. And I had boxes full of things like VHS cassettes and that sort of thing. And I was going through this big box of VHS cassettes. Now, I was really bad at labeling VHS cassettes. I would often not bother, and I'd just know roughly what they were, or to have some sort of picture or code, like a doodle or a code on it, so I'd know roughly what it was. So I was going through them to see which ones I definitely want to keep and which ones I could get rid of. Because at that point, I'd put away my VHS recorder player. It was all DVD and satellite at that time. So I was going through these, which is obviously bring back a lot of memories. And at the same time, I was watching the satellite program. And I don't know whether people in the UK will probably remember that there were a lot of these countdown shows that would go like the top 100 something, and would last for like 3 or 4 hours, usually on an obscure satellite channel. But this one was a top 100 or 50 or whatever sci-fi shows, and most of them were British. And I was watching that. There was quite a lot of ones that I remembered, but it came up to Sapphire and Steel. And I know Sarah doesn't like Sapphire and Steel, but Sapphire and Steel was one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. And it sort of reminded me of when I was that age. I was like 9 or 10 when Sapphire and Steel came out, and I was very sort of into all the psychic stuff and all that, and I was a bit mad. So I kind of thought that I had powers myself and all this sort of stuff. And when I started to get nostalgic like that, I can almost go back to that mindset. It feels like I can continue a train of thought, or I have like a sort of a need for something, like a yearning for something that I haven't had since then, which has suddenly come back. I could literally just walk back through a portal into that time, and it would be like nothing had gone by. So I was kind of feeling that, and it felt kind of weird. I was also obviously looking through these old VHSs as well, and that wasn't helping. And I had this mirror against the just on the hearth on the chimney breast above the fire, and it was quite a big mirror my mother had bought. I don't know if it was antique. It was maybe 1930s, 1940s, perhaps. Had quite a nice wooden surround around it. Probably post-war, I think. Probably wouldn't have been worth much, but it's a nice mirror. And when we got it, the thread was quite long at the back, so when you hung it off the wall, it hung off the wall probably about 3 or 4 inches. I'm not good at knowing inches. I'm a man. But they so I had to hang it up a bit higher, so it sort of looked down at you when you stood in front of it. And I was sitting there just getting this nostalgic feeling watching this show, and I suddenly heard this sort of banging, slapping noise, and I just wondered, what the hell's that? And I looked up, and this mirror, which, as I say, was hanging forward off the wall by about 4 inches, was banging against the wall. It was lifting up and banging against the wall. And not just like kind of vibration or like a slight sort of quivering. It was hitting the wall really hard, kind of like... Sorry if that was loud. I have no idea how long it went on for, but I was just staring at it in disbelief. And again, I didn't think at first this is like a poltergeist or whatever. I was just looking at it going, okay, that's weird. And when it stopped, which I have no idea how long it was when it stopped, but I kind of just sat there for a while. Sorry, Phil. And I've got a pop shield in front. I don't know why it was so loud. But then my ex-partner was upstairs, and I went upstairs and I said, "Did you feel something or hear something?" Because I thought, was it like something that shook the house? But he said no, he didn't hear anything at all and didn't feel anything. Why? What's the matter? Sort of thing. And the thing was, like, on the mantelpiece just below that mirror, we had a lot of basically tat on there that my mother had given to us, sort of like tiny little ornaments and little cheap little things, and sort of tiny little vases with things stuck in them, like those little sticks that had scent on them, and that were a thing back then. And none of them were moving, making any kind of noise or anything like that. It was just this mirror. Now, of course, I'm not going to just accept that this was something weird. I tried to think of explanations, and there is a train track that runs through my town, and my house. It wasn't close, but it was sort of on the same. It was on the floodplain, basically the flat part that goes to the river. So it wasn't close, but it was on the same sort of bit of land. And I wondered whether a train did it. Thank you, Rob. Is it as common as your mermaid video? But the more I thought about it, I just thought, no, I don't know if that's an explanation at all. As I said, why wasn't anything else shaken? It hasn't happened before. It hasn't happened since. Also, I have a little bit of understanding of how sound waves work. I do a bit of audio stuff, music stuff. So I work with. Did you say that on Sarah's live, Wayne? It's hard to unsee. It awakened things in me that I didn't know needed to be awakened. But anyway, as far as I know, if kind of a vibration of that kind would stretch as far as it would have to stretch, and I can understand that maybe it's a weird circumstance of cars being parked in a certain formation, made it louder or it stretched it, but I would think that if it stretched that far, the sort of peaks and troughs would be very, very far apart. Or if it was really concentrated, they would be very close together and very small, which would mean it wouldn't bang against the wall like that. So if what had happened had been that there was kind of a ringing, singing sound from the mirror, and maybe even if it shattered, I would have thought, well, that's an explanation then. It's just the vibrations, but I don't know. It doesn't ring true to me. Now, I don't think it was a poltergeist, though. And as I've said before in other lives, like when Justin did his with Kenny Biddle about, what do you call it, telekinesis. I mean, a lot of people said telekinesis is the cause of poltergeist. It's not an entity at all. It's just like a sort of disembodied force. And Charles Fort, as you know, I'm a Fortian, so I read and I've read lots of Charles Fort. He covered a lot of poltergeists in his last book, which was called Wild Talents. And the Wild Talents bit actually refers to these sort of talents we may not realize we have, but come out in those moments. Because he pointed out in a lot of the poltergeist cases in the turn of the 20th century, there was always some sort of stress involved in the family. And nowadays we think of them being, connected to adolescent kids and, kids of a certain age, and think that's to do with it. But it's, he noted it could be any kind of stress. I'm just going to put Mr. Prism's thing up there. And also,
There are only two things I can't stand in this world. People who are intolerant of other people's cultures and the Dutch.
so yeah, it's just a coincidence that I was thinking about this time when I was really young and really a lot more open-minded, and kind of thought that I had powers and all this weird shit that you think when you're a kid. And then that happened at that very point. It's kind of weird, to be honest, that all happened at that time. But what does Seg think about it?
I'm an Englishman in
Australia.
I'd like to welcome the pommy bastard to God's own earth.
Probably was what you'd think of it. So, does anybody else have any similar experiences? I'd like to know. Anyone ever had a kind of weird thing happen when they were in a kind of state where they were thinking back, or they were sort of thinking back to a time when they were more open-minded, or even did things happen when you were back then and when you were more open-minded? No, I don't like the Dutch ovens, Phil. Also, Dutch oysters. I would avoid them if I was you. But like when I was a kid, I did, as I said, I did used to believe in a lot of that stuff. Or I kind of desperately wanted those things to be real, and but I kind of think that maybe being more likely to believe might make things happen. I can remember when I was younger, sort of middle school age, I would if I was with a friend and someone was on like a bike or a skateboard or was running, I would just point at the kid and go, "Watch this," and then the kid would fall over or fall off the bike or something like that. Which someone would say that's just coincidence, but it's just probably is. But it did look impressive at the time, so I'm going to take it as a win. So Sage, what sort of experiences have you had? Sorry, as I smack my pop shield. No, Wayne, it wasn't. I was indoors. Everything was shut. It wasn't a draft like Kieran would say. Like I said, if someone came up and said, it could be this and could be that, I'll be welcome to give it a try, because I think everything needs to be tested. I don't like some people come up with a mundane explanation but expect it not to be tested. I think, don't just go, "Oh, it's this," and then you expect people to go, "Oh, okay, then," because that one's accepted, so I'm just going to accept it. And the Uncanny did that thing, which was really good when Kieran said the light fitting in the that farmhouse had basically curled up and almost touched the ceiling because there was a draft. And then Danny went into a wind tunnel to show how strong a wind you need to do that. And he was chained down, and the wind was so strong before the light fitting even moved kind of at a right angle. The wind was so strong, it would look like he was having that effect when astronauts go up to space and the skin sort of does that weird thing. So I did like that they did that, because it's just, you hear that quite a lot. Oh, it's just a draft, or it's that. Well, okay, then test it then. And if it does the same thing, fair enough. But if it doesn't, then it's probably not that either. So Sage, what you said there. So did you experience anything when you were there, Sage?
Would you like to see my limp penis?
I swear he's about that big and about that thick.
It's enough of you, Dan. Come on. It's bad enough when you did it the first time. Sage, if you want to put that in the chat, I will do another ad break, and it's going to be a longer one. I need to go to the little boys' room. I'm going to break here. It's not a break, actually. This is a very important service. This is the shipping forecast.
This is such a roll-off with the shipping forecast in conjunction with the Word Association Society. There are warnings of gales in Viking, Rockall, Marling, Hebrides, Fair Isle, and a severe gale in Coronation Street. The general synopsis: low 120 miles west of Viking, expected 50 miles west of Bailey, slow moving, losing its identity, I know how it feels. The area forecasts for the next 24 hours. Viking, North of Cheer, South of Cheer, East and West of Cheer, Hobbiton the Sheer. 40s, Coromity, the Old Man in Fraggle Rock, southwesterly 5 to 7, but variable 4 and south of Cheer at first. Moderate, rain or showers, possibly fatalities, good. 4th, Tyne, Dogger, on the weekend. 4 or 5, occasionally 6 and Tyne. You haven't a clue back in south or southwest, 5 to 7, what I'm on about, moderate or rough, I could just be making this up. Dover, Portland, Plymouth, easterly 4 or 5, veering drunkenly northwesterly in Plymouth later, hello sailor, slight or moderate, rising slowly, good, occasionally pure evil. Biscay, Trafalgar, and North Fitzroy, Dozen Fitzpatrick, variable 4 in North Fitzroy first, otherwise southwesterly. Rain then showers, huge phallus, rising slowly, good. Sarah Lundy, Killing, Fastnet, Irish Sea, Irish Stew, in the name of the law, Shannon, Rockall, Fockall. Westerly or southwesterly 5 to 7, except Shannon, becoming very high, Crackhall. Fair Isle, Faroes, Mums Go To, Southeast Iceland. Southerly Gale 8, becoming cyclonic Coley Nolan, 405, rising to Prawn Ring 6. Caricatona, rough or very rough, occasionally poor.
I'm back. Okay. Sorry, that bit, the bit when I say rock all, fuck all, just makes me laugh all the time. That's my cousin and I used to say she would play a form of peekaboo with us when we were young, and a room full of people saw her during a birthday party. Wow, what did she look like, Sage? Before we moved into the smaller house that was being built, it was the house where my mother saw that UFO. While that was being built purposely for us, we lived in this massive house that used to be a boarding wing, and it was boarding wing for the grammar school. And I can boast that I lived for a couple of years in a house that had 30 odd toilets. But while we were there, we didn't experience anything. It had actually quite a nice atmosphere, and it was a nice place. But we had a New Year's Eve party there once, and we had some family over, some cousins and aunties. And my cousin came into the big room that used to be my playroom, where we were having the party. And he was surprised to see his and my auntie there. As he said, he thought he saw her in the passageway, but going in a different direction. But he said after that, actually, that's weird because I'm just realizing it didn't really look like you, and the person was wearing something completely different. But that was the only thing from that house. I said it was quite a nice house. It had Bakelite when we first moved in. It hadn't been used for years, and there was still those black Bakelite telephones there. And in one of the rooms, there was like 2 sitting rooms. There was like a large sitting room and then a small sitting room. And I think that one was for the servants, because there was one of those things on the wall where, you know, when people in different rooms could ring, and it would come up on this sort of thing on the wall, which room was ringing. So that was kind of cool. So, peekaboo. I was listening to the podcast "We Were Spacemen" by Nathan Fillion and Alan Tudyk, and Nathan Fillion often asks the guests that they have on whether they've seen a ghost. I thought it was interesting. I was kind of thinking, maybe I could get an interview with them. But they usually have people on who they've worked with before. And on one show they had, I can't remember what her name is. Her name might be Molly something. She played his daughter in Castle. And she was the first person he asked and said, yeah, I used to see a ghost for years when I was a kid. And she described seeing someone, a woman who was bald and would grin, just sit in a chair and grin at her, but she had sharpened teeth, sort of sharpened down to a point. And this went on for years and years. So I thought that was fascinating. Scary, I would crap myself. She wore a blouse, skirt, and sweater and had dark hair. She would sit in the corner of the room and disappear when we would look, then reappear and disappear each time we would look, then laugh. Wow. That's cool. You know that, like, seeing things is really actually rare. Most paranormal encounters, actually, the sight of things is the rarest. It's usually the highest ones are hear or feel. Like a feel for presence or something, or panic. And a lot of that possibly can be explained by things like infrasound and stuff like that. I don't think it explains everything though. But yeah, hearing things is by far the highest thing. Like actually seeing things is very low down. Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. It's kind of weird though how she said she just got used to it after a while. I think people do. When you hear about these hauntings, you hear about people getting just getting on with their lives and just not really caring that much anymore. It's just something like everything else. You have problems in your house, a ghost is just one of them. One of the things I find interesting, just speaking about hauntings, because you very rarely hear this about the Enfield haunting, but there was a very good show about it on Apple TV. And Apple TV did something where they used a lot of files and recordings of the Enfield haunting back at the time that hadn't been heard of or used for a while, or used at all, actually. And one of them was I don't know any of the names or anything like that, I'm afraid, but I try to take a clip of it, but Apple TV are very very strict on that kind of thing, so I'd have to just try and get the names off it. But there was a person from an actual university came to test Janet. As you remember, Janet was fascinated with bending spoons, like, because Uri Geller was popular at the time, and she said she could bend spoons. So they wanted to test this, but they didn't want her to touch the spoons. So they brought this whole kit in, which had like a fork or a spoon or something like that. I think it was a fork on this apparatus, and it was linked to something that gave out a reading, a bit like a seismograph type thing, you know, with like the needle moving back and forwards on a rolling piece of paper. And she had to just sit and concentrate at the fork. And the guy who did the experiment, hi Sarah, hello. Lurking is fine. They said that and when she was concentrating on trying to bend this fork, the needle on the seismograph went so mental that it snapped. And you just don't hear that because people have got it in their head that she was faking the voice thing, so Janet was fake, or Janet was causing them all. But they don't hear about this thing where there was an experiment where she snapped a needle by concentrating on something with just a mind. So that is a bit odd. And I know what Kenny would say. He would say, I haven't seen the experiment. There's something probably dodgy about the experiment or what the method they were using. And fair enough, I don't know, but I still find it interesting. And I think when you look into a lot of cases of hauntings where there's children involved, there's always a point where they will try and make something happen. And it doesn't mean that the whole thing was fake. And they even made that a part of Ghostwatch. When they did a dramatization of it, they made a bit where they were faking it for one part. But I think the Enfield haunting was particularly interesting because, the kids had lost their dad, and these two investigators came who they got close to, especially Morris Gross. So you can understand that when things quietened down, they might have done something to try and keep them there, but that doesn't mean that there was nothing else happening. But we just don't know, do we? It's okay to say we don't know. That is the 14 thing. I might do a live stream about being 14 and Charles Fort and all that, because Stu Neville, who was on Justin's show, he explained a bit of it, but I think that there's a lot more to it. There's actually a podcast by Paul Giamatti, the actor. He was in many things. Sideways. He was the Rhino in the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Was it The Lady in the Water, that Shamalama Ding Dong film? And it's that one recently he was in where it's people who are left behind in a boarding place of a school. It's not Leftovers, something similar to that. Anyway, he's actually someone who is really interested in all that, and he actually subscribes to 14 Times. And he had someone I knew who writes for 14 Times. He's actually the news editor for 14 Times, Ian Simmons. And he used to live up in Newcastle near me, or near Newcastle near me. And I covered a sort of a weekend conference that he did on myths and monsters. And he left to go back down to London, and obviously to start work again for 14 Times. But he's been on Paul Giamatti's podcast twice, talking about Fort. His podcast is called Chinwag. So if you want to have a look at that, there's 2 episodes with Ian Simmons on, and he talks a lot about Fort and all that. And like he says in those, there's a wide spectrum of people who are Fortians. There's people who are more scientific, but they like all the other weird stuff, but they think that eventually it will be explained. There's other people who really go to the other, but we're not meant to really go to either side totally. But there are also a lot of Fortians who just like all the weird stuff, and they don't really care whether it's true or not. Because Fort, he just wanted to report these things that were being ignored and excluded by science and religion. And I often think, there's a short story by William Burroughs about a guy whose arsehole starts talking to him, telling him things he doesn't want to hear. And with all due respect to Fort, I think that he was the talking arsehole. Hello, what do you want? Sorry, the dog's just coming. Yes. You can't come in now. I'm live. You terrible man. So, Sage, well, you can add more if you want to. No one's reminded me to tell you about my mother. Let me tell you about my mother. Blade Runner. The dog is here. The dog is here. The dog is here. when I evolve to start doing it by cam, I might entertain you guys with a. Oh, can you hear him licking my arm? I could entertain you with my playing of the harmonica. My dog accompanies with howling. Okay, I'll tell you what happened to my mother. Stop licking me arm. He thinks I'm a lollipop. What's oops, that was the wrong one. What's Laura's magazine? It's all right. Anyway, while Sage is typing, I'll tell you my mother's story. Stop licking. Both my brother and sister are older than me. My sister is 8 years older than me, and my brother is 11 years older than me. So 7 years before I was born, my family lived. My dad was like a handyman on a big estate, and not a council estate. I mean, like a big stately home estate, somewhere in the northeast that I will remain nameless for reasons that you will come to realize. So they had a small cottage, not that type, in the grounds of the estate, and my mother was at home doing the ironing, and my brother, who was probably only about 2 or 3 at the time, this was 1963, so yeah, three would have been 3, and my sister was just a baby, just coming up to her first birthday. And the guy who owned the estate was, as a lot of rich people are, tight as a crab's arse. So he didn't want, even back in the 60s, you had to have boilers fitted properly by Corgi registered people. But he didn't want to do that because that costed money, so he got someone else who worked on the estate to put in the boiler. And while my mother was ironing in front of the hearth and the big fireplace, which the boiler was behind, it blew up. And the hearth and the chimney went straight into her. It almost knocked her leg off, broke her arm, knocked her teeth out, and all the coal went flying, like little bits of coal, like shrapnel, went into her. And she used to have like tattoos where the coal went into her skin and left a mark behind, like a tattoo. And then it blew my brother out the window, and then he ran back in the house, which was great. And my sister was in a different room. So of course, because there was burning coal everywhere, the house set on fire. And my mother was, I don't know if she was knocked out at first, but she came around and the house was on fire. And she tried to save my brother and sister by crawling on her stomach, with my brother on her back and my baby sister on her back, towards the front door, dragging her leg behind her that was only attached by one tendon. She lost my sister. She fell off part of the way there, but just as she got to the door, my dad arrived. So he got her out, and she said my sister was still, the baby's still in the house, at which point it was fully on fire. So my dad went in, he couldn't see anything. So luckily though, he accidentally kicked her. She was on the floor, and he accidentally kicked her when he was looking for her, and she cried out, so he grabbed her and ran out. So that was the early 60s, so medicine and medical procedures weren't great. They tried to reattach and reconstruct my mother's leg as best they could, but didn't do a particularly good job. I had to take a bone out of her hip and attach it like that. It was just like below the knee, mostly that needed to be reconstructed to that to use a part of her hip, which gave her a very weird looking leg, which she basically had one leg much, much shorter than the other for the rest of her life. Well, until the early 90s anyway. And she was in plaster for about 2 years. And the person who owned the stately home had told them they didn't need house insurance or contents insurance. So they didn't have anything to any way of getting any money back. And they literally, no one was touching anyone below the knee, Friday House. Welcome, by the way. And my mother's leg was reconstructed, mostly below the knee. But the titled sod at the stately home, he didn't do anything to help, apart from he did get a few bits of furniture together. But then there was a flood in the village nearby, and back in those days, like the people in the stately home had to. Friday, she's not doing that well. She died 2 years ago, so you know. But she did. She worked for many years afterwards, after this happened. And now I'm doing great, thanks. But when this flood happened in the village nearby, he gave all that furniture that was meant to be for my family to them. So he wanted to keep in with the villagers, not us. But my dad, my mother, and my entire family had to move in with his mother. And he basically lost his job, lost his house, all because they put a boiler in that wasn't fit to be in, and nearly killed the entire family. And it was actually on the news at the time. The local news came to cover it, and it was in the newspapers and everything, but they didn't get a penny of insurance. They went to court, and they got nothing. So, yeah. And then in the early 90s, because my mother knew someone who was a surgeon and did that kind of thing, he said he wanted to have a go, and he did a better job of reconstructing the leg, sort of making right what they kind of cocked up back then in the 60s. They did their best, I guess. But so, yeah. And when she died, actually, she was cremated. And we got the bits back that were in her leg. And my brother wanted them because he was going to, I don't know what he was going to do with it, but I don't know whether he wanted to make a medallion with them or something. But there were so many bits, so when we looked at it, we thought, yeah, we can't do anything with these things, so we're just going to have to find a way of either scattering them or burying them somewhere. So that was kind of weird. We didn't do a very good job of scattering things with when my mother died. We went out to the Lake District where my dad's ashes had been scattered, and we took turns of scattering my mother's ashes. And when it was my turn, the wind blew, and I don't know if you've seen the end of The Big Lebowski when they spread Donnie's ashes and they all fly back into them. That's basically what happened to me. So. Right, if anyone has any questions, anyone wants to talk about anything, you can do that in a bit. I'm going to find something for us to watch. Take that off. I'm trying to find something. I tell you what. Why does this not work? Oh, here we go.
I'm an Englishman in
Australia.
I'd like to welcome the pommy bastard to God's own earth.
You like to see my limp penis?
I swear he's about that big and about that thick.
Oh, God, that makes me laugh. Oh, I'm trying to find teddy seals. I don't know what it is. It was, yeah. Oh, I can't click on that right now. There you go. You know, when I think about people like, the fans of people like Twin Paranormal and lay the tit and stuff like that. This is basically how I think of them. I don't know if anyone's been in Don't Scare Claire's lives or premieres, but you get a lot of blokes in there, and they often come across a bit like this. Some thirsty blokes. And the partner's right there. It's shocking. Guys just need to calm down. Ah, bugger. Yeah, well, why can't StreamYard show some things, but it can show some things? That didn't make any sense. Never mind. Talk amongst yourselves. Here we are.
Yes?
Good evening, sir. I'm delighted to bring to you an exclusive offer this evening. Do you have a few moments to spare to hear this once-in-a-lifetime offer?
How dare you, sir? How dare you have the audacity to interrupt my plans to take over the world whilst wearing very camp clothes and using strange retro equipment? Begone, sir, begone now.
So, sir, you wouldn't be interested in half-price luxury silk robes with gold embossed kimono dragon detail?
Silk robes? Silk robes with kimono dragon detail? Hold on. That's the very thing a supervillain can relax in after a hard day of being evil.
I can take that order now, sir, if you have a credit card or debit card handy.
Yes, I'll take 7, 1 for every day of the week. Ha ha ha! I'll be the envy of the supervillain club when we meet to stroke pussy. But just wait here while I get my electron card.
Sorry, we don't take electron. Goodbye.
Bugger!
There you go. Okay, Wayne has a cue, from what I heard. What's your take on paranormal teams using fake gadgets? Well, any kind of gadgets, really. I've said quite a lot of times that this equipment that they use, its purpose at the start was to rule out environmental things, to take note of temperature changes and all that type of thing, and use the thermal stuff, and EMF things were meant to tell whether there's an electrical field that could be causing these problems. So they've just evolved into these things where people just think they just tell you there's ghosts there. So the fake ones, it's just an evolution of that, really. It's just, we might as well just have something that's complete crap instead. And it's such a shame that they use REM pods when they could just make them into a what do you call them? Not a zither, the other thing. Much more preferable, I think. A lot more fun to use. Any more questions? Theremin, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Prism. I got word blindness. Yeah, they know exactly what they're doing with the DR60. They know it's something that can be easily manipulated to cause things that sound interesting, and people who are a bit weird sounding. I don't know why they would spend so much money doing it to buy something like that doesn't work, but some people have more money than sense, don't they? I used to be really, really interested in EVPs, and I did think there was something in it. Now, opinions kind of moved a bit, but I still think there's some that are very, very cool, very interesting. I don't know what they are. I don't know whether we're just picking up things that are normal. Like, obviously, there's a shitload of radio waves banging about and other things. So, but when it's something that seems to answer something, and if it's very, very clear, obviously the ones where people say this says this and it doesn't sound anything like it, that's a problem. But the guy who did a lot of those, what was his name again? Started with an R. I went to a exhibition by the artist Susan Hiller, who is no longer with us, sadly. She had a really big installation and a big art show in the Baltic in Gateshead, and she was interested in a lot of 14 things, and she had a room that was based on one of the parts of Wild Talents, the fourth book by Fort, about the psychic girls trained by Russia. And she had lots of little installations. She would do things with lots of different little artifacts in, and artifact in the art term, not in the historical term. And she had Rodive. That was the guy's name, wasn't it? Or Rodive. And she had an installation based just upon his EVPs. And a lot of them are really interesting. And the other one that she had, there was this massive room where you went into, and there was all these tiny little speakers hanging by lines or cords from the ceiling. And in every single speaker, when you went up close to them, there was an account of a UFO sighting being spoken by the person who saw it through the speaker. And you could only hear it when you got really close, but when you stood back, you could hear just like the rumbling of all the whispers of all these UFO witnesses. So that was really, really cool. And I covered it for 14 times. Now I went to a sort of talk with her, and it was really interesting because she, like some 14 people, she liked the stuff. She liked the weirdness. She liked the idea the weirdness was out there. Yeah. One thing that happened to me, which was odd, I used to use my dictaphone, but now I use my mobile. Justin didn't get that joke when I said it in his tea party about EVPs. But anyway, I used to have this little recorder, and I went to a meal with my parents at a place not far from here called Matfin. And Matfin has a small standing stone just outside the village. And I got them to drop me off. And I took this little recorder and I put it at the base of the standing stone. And I left for about 10 minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes. Just left it there, and I walked all the way to the other side of the field and back to where the village was. And I got it back. And when I listened back to it, the sound was weird. It sounded phased. I don't know if you know what phased sounds like. You know, have phasing effect on something. It sounds like it's playing down a drain pipe, that kind of type sound. You sometimes used to hear that in the sound. Or if you swing like a pipe around your head, or like a tube around your head, or like a vacuum cleaner hose, you get that weird sound. It sounded like that, and it was really loud. And there was a car that went past on the road, which was quite far away. But that car was really loud in the recording. So I don't know what the hell that was all about. I know people have got lots of theories about standing stones being there for sonic reasons, for kind of sonic attributes, and how that was used somehow. in rituals and that sort of thing. And that definitely kind of backs it up a bit if they could get sounds they got from it. Imagine if they were able to use that property of that stone by making the sound at that to get something back. Sounds quite interesting. That sounds quite interesting. If anyone has any more questions, please do ask me. You can ask me anything apart from measurements. Yeah, I wonder whether I still have that tape. I have loads of those little micro cassettes somewhere. I moved on from them to using electrical devices. I used to have this SanDisk iPod Nano ripoff that you could record on, and it was actually pretty good. If you listen to my Hexham Heads video with the interview with Brian and Sylvia, that was recorded on that little iPod Nano ripoff, and I took it down to a 14 times unconvention, where I was actually writing the sort of article about the unconvention for 14 times. So I was interviewing lots of people, and I took that down to record people, and I recorded my quick chat with John Ronson. You guys must have heard of John Ronson. It was a really nice bloke, really down to earth, really chatty bloke, and he was really interested in this little iPod Nano that I was using to record it. But the funny thing was, on the last day of the Uncon, I was using it to record a documentary by Nina Conti, who was the ventriloquist, who is the daughter of Bill Conti. No, is his name Bill Conti, or was that the composer? Tom Conti, the actor Tom Conti. But anyway, she did a really good documentary about ventriloquism. It featured the Vent Haven place in America where ventriloquists who are dying send their in their will, they send their dummies to this place, and they have them all on display there. And it sounds like it might be weird, but it was actually really weirdly moving to see it. I'm a bit weird like that. I attribute things to inanimate objects that I shouldn't, and I kind of feel sorry for the dummies. But when I was recording it, I left the Uncon, had a wander around London, got on the train to my hotel that was near Gatwick, got off at Gatwick, went through the airport, got a taxi from the airport to my hotel, went to my hotel, had something to eat, watched the telly, went to bed, had a full night's sleep, got up in the morning and realized I'd been recording it all. So I had 12 hours of recording on this little iPod Nano thing. I listened back to it, including listening to my night's sleep, and I was really disappointed that I didn't talk or fart during my sleep. That was very, very disappointing. It was very sound sleep I had. I'll actually, while I'm on, I'll talk about my experiences at Uncon in a bit, but there's some questions. Well, Friday House, I was born on Halloween, so there you go. That is the answer to that. No, but I was always interested. Like I said, my family, even though my dad was very skeptical and atheist, but my mother was very much a believer and that sort of thing. My brother and sister are, and so there's lots of stories being told. By part of my mother's family were into that type of stuff, and often we'd go to their house and they'd they were setting up for a seance later on after we left, but they didn't want to do it when I was there because I was only a kid. But something I was always interested in, and when I got to a certain age, I got interested in the sort of psychology of it, and a bit deeper of a dive into it. I got actually got a book about the tarot, and it's by a guy, I think he's called Alfred Douglas. And he goes into a lot of detail about the origins, the possible origins, and the meaning of the symbology on there. And he mentioned Jung quite a lot. And at the time, I was a bit ignorant. I thought it was someone called Jung, and it was like a Chinese philosopher or something, until I realized it was Carl Gustav Jung. And I started to read some Jung, and you don't know whether you know that, but Jung was very into that type of stuff as well. He wrote the first paper, like research paper or scientific paper on the psychological aspects of the UFO craze. He also wrote Synchronicity, which pissed a lot of people off, because instead of sort of suggesting that we just make sense of coincidences, but meanings into coincidences, he went as far to say that we maybe create them with our own minds as well, which didn't make much sense back then. But when you get into quantum mechanics, people can tie that together as well, making your own reality. But a lot of people now dismiss him because he was a bit too mystical, but I think a lot of that is based on his biography stroke autobiography that he released called Memories, Dreams and Reflections, where he talks a lot more about the weird stuff. But that is, that's not a scientific book. It's just it's a memoir. So it's a bit unfair that people use that. Then I started to read 14 times, probably 91. Back then it was still like a small sized thing. It was only released every 2 months. It wasn't long before it got to be like a normal size magazine released monthly. And then in the mid 90s, something happened which made it really popular. I don't know whether you can say in the chat what you think it was that happened in the 90s that made it really popular. Something to do with a TV program. The X-Files. There's no one guessed. Yeah, they rode a wave on the back of the X-Files for a while and got very, very popular after that. Putting it on their cover as often as they could. No problem, Friday House. You can listen back. You probably missed a lot about my mother's experiences and at the start as well. And then I went to college to do a higher education course in journalism, and a lot of that was theoretical rather than, we did do the practical stuff, but a lot of it was theoretical and a lot of it was cultural studies. And Sarah knows all about cultural studies, all that sort of thing, semiotics and culture, and I got really interested in all that, and I would bring that into pretty much every essay that I wrote for my journalism qualification. Psychology, Jungian psychology, and semiotics and all that. So that's how I got into it. But I think my interest has sort of gone through peaks and troughs over the years. But I think now is a very interesting time with all this YouTube stuff. Like I said, I'm writing an article for 14 times about the recent bother people have had with the paranormal channels attacking the debunking channels. I think they'll find that really interesting. People trying to be silenced, because we like to have both sides, so we can choose or just read both sides and not bother taking which one, because you don't need to take a side. Not everything's binary. As Fort said, one measures a circle beginning anywhere. It's the most realistic footage you've ever seen in an investigation. Oh, God. I gotta confess, I don't watch that many investigations. Now and again. I actually used to like ghost theory before I realized they were bollocks. It didn't take me long. But I used to like watching them mostly for the abandoned stuff and seeing things that have just been left there. Like details about people's lives that just stopped and frozen in time. I found that more interesting than the ghost stuff that they kept on bringing into it. I kind of spoiled it. I can't even think. What I can think about is the stuff that I thought was dodgy. The thing that totally turned me off ghost theory was when the bigger lad, I don't know which one, he had a door slam on him and he pushed through the door and made the camera go around the room but didn't go behind the door. And I thought, okay, bye. So that was me finished. And the one where they went through this really big tunnel, and you just hear noises like someone was smacking the rails further back in the tunnel, and you just thought, there's just another person there. But you can't tell the fans, can you? The fans are adamant, one of the two. That's what they are. Well, indeed, as we've already seen. A bit like that. Now, as I said to Beto, though, that there's no point trying to argue with them. They you might as well just learn to become a master at yoga, bend over backwards, and talk to your ass. You're never going to convince them. It's a parasocial relationship of being with a fan of a channel. Okay, I was going to tell you about the other uncons, wasn't I? I've seen quite a lot of people down at the uncons. Yeah. The thing is, though, that I think their ideas about the debunkers is mostly wrong. That they think they're just trying to say that paranormal isn't real and this isn't real and stuff like that. Most debunkers aren't saying that. They're just saying this stuff you did in this video is bollocks. They're not debunking the paranormal. They're debunking their shit videos. But anyway, the uncons, I mostly went from the early 2000s. And I saw quite a lot of people who were active back then. I actually walked past Colin Wilson, which was cool. I walked past him. You probably know that Colin Wilson was one of the first people to write about the Pontefract poltergeist, or 30 East Drive as we know it now. And so lots of experts. But someone who was a regular must-see event at the Uncons back in the 2000s, especially the early 2000s, was Ken Campbell. I don't know if people know who Ken Campbell was, but if you're a fan of Fawlty Towers, in the episode where Sybil thinks Basil's forgotten the anniversary and she leaves, and they have to pretend that she's still there, and then some friends arrive. He's the one who's always going, Sybil Baswell. And used to also be in the UK adverts for Citroen Picasso. He was, he had these really amazing eyebrows that had a life of their own. And he was very much a guru of sort of improv and weird stuff. He did a a play that went on for about 4 days non-stop, I think. But and also the guy from the KLF used to be part of his group at one point, which was odd. I found it out recently. It's very strange. And it explains the KLF really. But he did these things at Uncon, and there was one year where the auditorium was completely chocker. It was full, and I had to stand down the aisle against the wall. And he was doing a presentation with improv and all these type of bits in about gastromancy, which was a thing apparently done in Egypt or around about those times, where emissions from the bowels were sort of read to divine the future. And when I was standing there was this attractive young lady who I thought looked like she was wearing a suit jacket and nothing else. But I thought it could be shorts. It turned out I was right. At the end of his presentation, he got her up on stage, and she was called Mouse, and she'd been used quite a lot in his stage work. Apparently, she used to do the ping pong ball trick. I'm sure you know what that is. And to prove this thing about gastromancy, apparently that was his excuse anyway. They got her to bend over and put a funnel where the sun don't shine, poured down a lot of water, and then she squirted the water out of her backside about 20 to 30 foot into the audience. And all this was happening whilst about 2 or 3 miles away, the Queen Mother was lying in state. But I think that's what she would have wanted. Good night, Wayne. Have a good night. Yeah, I'm going to wrap this up in a bit. It would be nice to go to 2 hours, but I'm knackered as well. I had very little sleep yesterday. I was so tired. I'll tell you how tired I was. When I feed the dog, I have this electronic scale, and I put it on top of the cooker and use a scale to measure out what he gets for his dinner. And I was so tired yesterday, I put the scale on the cooker and went to turn the hob on, which would have went well. So anyway, yeah, well, this is my slightly shambolic first attempt at a live stream using StreamYard. But I think I might be getting the hang of it, at least putting the clips up. So I think on the weekend, I might try to do the One Step Beyond marathons with through StreamYard, and I'll just bring up the videos as I go. You can kind of have some of them up to just click on, but I see, because I'm constantly having to change the aspect ratio on OBS. They all have different aspect ratios, but you can't tell if you play the file on a normal video app. It doesn't come up like that, but when you do on ABS, it does for some reason. It's really irritating. So I'm gonna give that a whirl. I might record something else to put up there in the meantime. Another sort of ad break type thing that I've been working on. But apart from that, yeah, I hope you've all learned something today. Maybe learned that the paranormal experiences was what we met on the way, and the people we met on the way. Thank you very much, Sage Rat. In the future, I have some plans to do some things with lives. Like I've been talking to Roger about, and if anyone else wants to get involved, they can. To get involved, I might do some, like I did on some of those videos you saw tonight, where it's like an old clip, and I put like voiceover over it. I might do a thing like that, a kind of mystery theater 3000 riff tracks type thing, but it might be on something paranormal linked. And if people want to help out with that, that might be fun to do. My main goal was sometime in the future, after the One Step Beyond stuff is finished, is to do a quiz with guests kind of like a "Have I Got News for You," but with paranormal links, paranormal angle. So I'd probably need to get a bit more proficient at StreamYard, and also try and try to pay for the proper full version as well. Okay, guys, I'm just going to leave you this one last time with this, so you can have nightmares.
Would you like to see my limp penis?
I swear he's about that big and about that thick.
Friday House, no, I'm not at the minute. I'm thinking about doing it. So yeah, keep in touch, and I'll see. I'm going to try and do that. I'm thinking about Patreon as well, but I'm not really sure what I'm going to put up there at the minute. But you know, I haven't actually been doing that this long. I've had a YouTube channel since very early 2010s, but I only ever used it as a placeholder because I used to be involved with comedy channels, and I would use it as a placeholder to put up onto their channels, the videos that I did. So I've only really been doing this since after Justin's show, really. So I'll live and learn. The best way to contact me, can you remember what my old name used to be before? Well, I used to be Stu Farrell, and then I changed to something else, and then I changed back to Stu Farrell. It's that with gmail.com at the end. Actually, I'll just put it up. I mean, I'll put it in chat, but I'm not going to put it up on the screen. Oops. My StreamYard, so it takes ages to put the messages up. Yep, I know what you mean. So yeah, you can get in touch with me on there. It is the actual address that I use for YouTube. I don't know when Crow's going to use my quiz that I did for him. Hopefully I might try and go up when Crow's doing that. So that'd be good. I just hope it's not the silly o'clock in the morning for me. Okay. Thank you guys for popping along. I'll try to do something else. And I put my mind to it. I might do a live stream about solve sits rather. I'm trying to get some clips together for that. I think that'd be good. And a proper stream about fort and fortinism. Because I was working on a video for that, but I might just do the live stream and then just edit that down. All right. Have a good night, everyone. I am going to go when it goes to 2 hours. I'm slowing down. I'm just going to put the thumbnail back up and then play the music out for you. Goodbye.
Yes, I can hear you, Clem Fandango.